Hello, I'm Helen Bradley and welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to draw a retro camera and we're going to give it a hand-drawn look, and it's all going to be done in Illustrator. Before we get started, let's look and see what we're going to create. We're going to create this image that looks as if it's been hand-drawn. It's a vintage style camera. We're going to create lines and make them look as if they're hand-drawn. We're going to create circles, we're going to create shapes that intersect with each other, and we're also going to create this sort of crosshatch pattern again with a sort of hand-drawn look to it, and we're going to fill shapes with that. So if you're ready, let's get started with our camera. To get started with this hand-drawn camera look, we're going to create a new document. So I'll choose File and then New. I'm just going to make a square document for now, but yours can be any shape that you want. I'm using RGB as my color mode, so I'll click OK. I like my documents to be a little bit smaller and not anchored to the top of the screen, so I'm just going to deal with that now. And then we're going to add a rectangle that's going to be black filled. So I'm clicking on the rectangle tool and I'm drawing a rectangle that is the size of my artboard. And because I'm using the default colors, I can just click the arrow to fill it with black. I don't want any strokes, I'm going to turn the stroke off. Now in the layers palette, it's going to behove me to lock this layer down. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to lock this layer. That means that the black background's just going to stay in place and it's not going to move. I'm just going to click the Create New Layer icon here to create a new layer, and I'm going to build my effect up on that layer. So next we need the beginnings of our camera. So again, I'm going to go to the rectangle tool. I want a white stroke and I don't want any fill at all. I'm just going to drag out the basic camera shape. Now if I don't put the rectangle down exactly where I want it to go, before I finish drawing it, I can hold the space bar to move it into position. Just find that a little bit handy. Now I've got the stroke set to 1, just a uniform stroke. Next I'm going to select the wrinkle tool because I want to wrinkle this to make the edges a little bit less even. So I'm going to target the wrinkle tool, but I'm going to double click it as well because we need to set up the parameters for this tool. I find 100 for width and height for the brush is just a little bit small, so I'm setting it to 200. And intensity I'm setting to 10% because 50% is just too high. Now with the wrinkle options, I want to wrinkle in both a horizontal and a vertical direction. So I'm going to set horizontal to 100%, vertical to 100%, leave everything else as it is, and just click OK. Now we've still got the shape selected, so I can just tip along the edges of the shape very gently, just clicking once to just give it a slightly less even look, something that would look a little bit more like it was hand drawn. And I can test it by just pressing the letter V to go back to the Move tool and click away from the shape. Now I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to call that my basic surrounds. But I'm going to increase the stroke right now to 2 points because I want the outside of the shape to be a little bit thicker line than the inside. Next up, we're going to create the smaller rectangle inside the larger one. And to do that, we need to make a duplicate of this rectangle. So I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key on the Mac and just drag a duplicate of this path away. Now to make things a little bit easier to work with, I'm going back into the Layers palette here and I'm going to lock the bottommost copy of this rectangle and I'm going to hide it. So it just gets it out of the way so it's not in our face right now, and we can focus on the piece that we have got showing here. And what we're going to do is add a regular rectangle over the top of this. So I'm going to the regular rectangle tool. I'm just going to drag it over and I'm going to position it roughly where I want it to be. Now this is the piece that we want, the piece that is the intersection between these two shapes. So I'm going to select over both the shapes with the selection tool. So I've got both of them selected, and now I'm going to the Pathfinder by selecting Window and then Pathfinder. And I want the intersect, so I'm going to click here on this icon and that gives me the intersection of those two shapes. Now as you can see, there's a nice hand-drawn look on either side, but there's nothing across the top. Well, we need the wrinkle tool, so I'm going to select this shape and we're going back to the wrinkle tool. But before we get busy with the tool, let's double click the icon here and reset some of the parameters. Because what we want to do is to only wrinkle in a vertical direction, not in a horizontal direction. So we're going to set the horizontal back to how it started at 0. And what that lets us do is to just wrinkle these top areas, but not affecting the sides. So the sides of this shape should still line up with the original shape that we had. Let's go back to the selection tool. Let's turn everything back on. And let's move this second version of our shape back into position. It should sit nicely over the top of the first one. So far this is what we've got for our camera. It's time now to go and put in the lens and some cross-hatching for the edges. Now for the camera lens we need a circle, so I'm going back to the tools here and we're going to choose the ellipse tool, and by holding the shift key down as I draw I can constrain this to a circle and hold the space bar so I can move it into position. So I'm going to place it roughly where I want it to be and then let go everything. Now this is already set to a 2-point stroke, which is exactly what I want. Now to get working on this, I'm going to lock down the underlying two shapes. So these two rectangles are going to be locked down. So the only thing that's about to be affected is the circular path that we've created. I'm going to double click on the wrinkle tool again because I want to set the horizontal and vertical values to 100%. So I'm wrinkling in all directions and click OK. I'm going around this shape, just wrinkling the edges, again to give it the look of a hand-drawn circle. I'll just click away from it and check what I have. I want a second circle, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key as I drag on this circle to make a duplicate of it. And then I'm going to hold Shift and Option or Shift and Alt and just size it down so it's going to sit inside the first circle. And then so it doesn't look like an exact copy, I'm just going to rotate it a bit. I just want the edges to be different on either side of the circle. And now I can just move it back into position. So that's looking pretty good here. But the problem is now that we need to cut the lines here out of these circles. So we're going to do that next. What we're going to do at this point is to hide and lock down the inner circle. So that's the topmost shape here. So I'm just going to lock it down and hide it. And I'm also going to hide this outside rectangle because we don't need to see it either. So that's that shape. It's these two shapes that we're concerned about, and we want them both to be visible and unlocked. And what we need to do next is to cut this line and this line here out of this shape. And the simplest tool to use for that is actually going to be the Shape Builder tool. So with the selection tool selected, I'm going to drag over both the shapes to select them and then target the Shape Builder tool here. It shares a toolbar position with the live paint tools. So I'm selecting Shape Builder. And what I'm going to do here is just click and drag to join these three segments together. And that makes a single shape. And then these two side shapes are individual shapes now. So they've been sort of divided up and rebuilt exactly the way I want them to be. So again, I'll go back to the selection tool and just click away from the shape. And now I can put everything back and just see how everything is looking. Well, I think the inner circle is probably not small enough. And it's also a little bit off center. So I'm just going to size it using the Shift and Alt keys to size from the middle and also to size in proportion so that it remains a sort of circular shape. I'm just going to move it into position. The next thing we're going to look at is adding some cross-hatching into this area here and this area here. And it's going to involve a little bit of footwork. So I'm going to grab everything here and just move it out of the way. So I'm turning the locks off from all of these shapes and just grabbing everything and just tucking it out of the way because I'm going to need some space up here to go and create my cross-hatching. And the cross-hatching is going to be created using line segments. So I'm going to click on the line segment tool and I'm just going to drag out a vertical line. And then I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to grab the selection tool and hold the Alt or Option key as I drag away a duplicate of that line. I'm going to set each of these lines to just 1-point lines because I think they're a little bit thick for the cross hatching, and I'm going to wrinkle them. So again, I'm going to select over this shape and go and get the wrinkle tool and just wrinkle it. And I'll do the same thing over here. Now what I want to do is to create a whole grid of lines. So I think I'm just going to move this one a little bit further away, and I'm going to select over both of these lines. And I'm going to click here on the blend tool because the blend tool can make all the lines for me. So I'm just going to click on that tool, and I'm going to click once on this line and then once on this line. And you can see that it's created a whole lot of lines there, more than I actually need. But I can double click here on the blend tool to open up the settings. Now, because I've used this tool recently, that's probably why I'm getting lots of lines. You might only get one line, so don't worry, just double click on the tool and then start to set the settings up. I want specified steps because I want a certain number of steps all the way across this shape. I'm going to enable preview so I can see what I'm doing and then start decreasing these steps because they started at 70 and I don't want nearly that many. So I'm just looking at a reasonable setting that's going to give me some nice cross hatching. I think something like 35 is going to work really well for me. So I'll just click OK. And there's the first part of my cross hatching. The second part is just going to be this selection rotated. So I'm going to select over the entire blended shape, hold down the Alt or Option key and drag another version of it out of the way. I'm running out of space here a little bit, so I'm just going to open up a little bit more space around the edge of my artboard. I'm going to reselect this shape. Because it's a blended shape, you only have to sort of hit it at some point to select the entire shape. And now I'm going to rotate it, so I'm going to make sure it's selected and then hold my mouse pointer outside the edge of it and just rotate it around. And I want to rotate it 90 degrees, so I'm going to hold the Shift key as I do that, so it's rotated precisely 90 degrees. And now I'm going to place this over the top of the original shape so I can get a look at what my cross hatching is going to look like. So now let's go back to our camera and see what we need to do. Well, we've got two shapes here that we want to fill with this cross hatching, but we want to rotate the cross hatching 45 degrees so we can fill the shapes with it. So there are a couple of things to do. Firstly, I'm going to select each of these two shapes, hold the Alt or Option key, and just drag a duplicate of the shape away. So I've got the two shapes that I now need to fill. I'm going to lock everything else down. It's probably going to behove me to hide them and lock them. Just making sure that I'm hiding and locking the right pieces. So now I've got just the shapes I want to fill and just the thing that I want to fill them with. So I'm going to select over this combined shape now and rotate it 45 degrees. So I'm doing that by holding the Shift key as I rotate it, and that rotates it and constrains the rotation as it moves, and that's given me my 45-degree rotation. Now I need to cut two shapes out of this, so I'm probably going to need a second version of my cross hatching. So I'm just going to touch this shape out of the way for a minute, grab my cross hatching and Alt drag a duplicate of it out of the way. So I've got two sets of cross hatching and two pieces that I need to cut out of my cross hatching. So let's concentrate on this one first. I'm just going to move it over the top of the cross hatching and I'm going to select everything. I'm going to make sure that my path is on top, which it isn't right now. So I'm going to move it in the layers palette so it sits above the other shapes. So I've got all three shapes selected, the two crosshatch shapes which are underneath this path. And now I'm just going to create a clipping mask by choosing Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And what that does is just clip that cross hatching to the shape that I want. So it's ready to go back in just a minute into the camera. But let's do the same thing over this side. Again, I'm just going to grab and drag my cross hatching into position. I'm going to go and get the piece of the camera that I want to have filled with cross hatching. I'm going to line it up pretty much the same place as this one is, so that the cross-hatching is going to look pretty much the same on each. I think that's a pretty good setting there. Now I'm going to select everything and just make sure that this shape here is moved above everything else. So just moving it into position, shift clicking here to make sure all three pieces are selected. And the concept of a clipping mask is that you're going to clip to the topmost object. That's why it's important that this camera shape is on top of the cross-hatching, because we want to cut out a camera shaped piece out of the cross-hatching. So that's why we're using that ordering, and that's why we're choosing Object Clipping Mask Make. And there's our second piece. Now let's go and bring back all the other pieces of the camera. I'm going to unlock those pieces. Just going to grab hold of all of these pieces and just move them all back into the artboard a little bit more centrally. Press Control or Command 0 just to square up the artboard. And now let's go and get our clipping shapes. We're just going to position them back over the top of the shape that they were cut from. Because we made a duplicate, we've still got the original outline shape, and now we're just putting the cross-hatching into position. And so we've got the look of hand-drawn cross-hatching, and we've just got a few little bits and pieces to finish up with on our camera. Next I'm going to the pen tool. I'm just going to click, so I'm just drawing straight lines, but I'm going to click here to start my line. I'm going up a little bit, across, and down again, and then back to here, just to create a shape. And I'm going to move it out of the way by targeting the selection tool and just dragging it out of the way. I want it to be just a little bit longer because I'm going to cut some of it off in just a minute. Now we want this to be a 2-point stroke so that it matches the rest of the outline here, and we do want to wrinkle it too. So let's just check our wrinkle tool settings are correct. 200 pixels for width and height, intensity 10%, and horizontal and vertical 100%. And so we can just click here to just wrinkle our shape. Now I need a duplicate of this shape to cut this one out. So I'm just going to Alt drag a copy of it into position, and I'm going to move this one into position too. And that's a pretty good placement for this. And what I want is this piece here. So I'm going to grab this path here and just move it to the very top. And then double check that this path is immediately underneath it. So I'm going to select both of these, the big box and the little topper piece that I have. And the big box is on the top. So if I choose minus front, we're going to subtract the big box from this shape, and it's going to give us just the piece that we want. And now we can drag that back into position because it was cut out of this. It's going to fit perfectly in here as soon as we get it in the right spot. And now we'll add a little piece over here, again done in the same way. Now because we've done it previously, it's going to be a lot quicker doing it this time, so I'm not going to tell you how I'm doing it, but I'm just going to step through it quickly. But it's exactly the same process. I'm going to add another shape on this side, and exactly the same way as we did the others. So again, I'm just going to do it and not talk over the top of it. Now I've created a circle and a rectangle. I'm just going to unify those to make a single shape, and then wrinkle it, and then do my cutting out. Now I think this has got too many wrinkles, so we can solve that problem. I'm going to select the zoom tool. I'm just going to zoom into this, and without having to remake the shape, just going to grab the smooth tool here, and then I'm going back with the selection tool. And with the smooth tool, I can just smooth out the shape if it's a little bit too rough, which I'm going to do. And we're going to finish off with a couple of circles here. So I'm going to drag out an ellipse, well, drag out a circle by holding down the Shift key as I drag out my circle. I'm going to fill it with white, so I'm going to flip the fill color and the stroke color and then just wrinkle it. And then I'm going to Alt drag on this shape to create a second shape, exactly the same as the first. But for this one, I'm going to flip the stroke and the fill, so it's the exact opposite to this one. And I'm going to enlarge it by shift dragging on it a little bit, and then place it back in position. I'm going to make the stroke width 2 points. And so I've got sort of like a little button now. So I'm going to select over that and choose Object Group so that the entire object moves as one. And now I can put it into position. And if I want another one, I can Alt drag a duplicate out of the way and rotate it so it looks just a little bit different, and then put it into position. And if I want another one still, I can do that. Let's pop a very small one down here. By holding Shift as I drag, I can just decrease the size of this shape. If I zoom in, I can grab the middle shape and just size that down a little bit if I want to. Holding Alt and Shift, so it's not only sized in proportion, but the middle of the shape remains exactly where it is. So let's just go back out here. And this is the finished camera. Now you could go ahead and make additional embellishments on your camera, but you've seen now how to draw an object that has lines that look as if they're hand drawn, and also to create a sort of crosshatch pattern, again with a hand drawn look, to clip that crosshatch pattern into a shape and then to assemble a finished line drawing. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this video tutorial. Look out for more video tutorials like this here on my YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com, where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.